Hello and welcome to Chapter 5. Chapter 5, you can see, is all about functions. And I get excited when I get to this chapter because, the things that we've been doing so far, we've been doing sequential programming and great. We've been, learning about all sorts of different tools to use. But realistically, when you get to uh, do anything beyond basic programming, you're going to be able to need to use functions. Uh, before you go any further, I just want to say too, this chapter is a little bit deeper than the others. If we're basing it on page count, you'll see it's a little bit thicker. There are a lot of things in this chapter. You'll find functions aren't difficult, but you kind of need to get the hang of it. It takes a little more practice maybe, and the concepts are a little bit different than things we've been doing so far. Hopefully this isn't the night that the first, you're not watching this video and starting on chapter 5 the night that the first bank of assignments is due. Anyway, we'll take a look at a lot of different things. This particular video, I'm just going to look at a few kind of quick overview pieces, and then we'll look at some live code in the next section video. Let's take a look at some of the topics that we'll be covering. And doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you yet, but you see, we'll be doing some of this kind of good stuff in here. So introduction functions, defining and calling. You'll see this calling in here. You'll call a function. It just means to execute it, to run it. So you'll see that terminology used when we're calling or running a function, executing it. So we'll do this, then we're running through. We'll do some other little things in here and make more sense to you when we get to it. So let's go ahead and just kind of take a look at the first section, and we'll sort of define it a little bit. So a function is just a very simple definition of a function: group of statements within a program that perform a specific task. So usually you'll see it's just a piece of a bigger program, and it could be thousands of lines of code, but a function may only include a single statement in it, or it could include multiple statements. So we'll take a look at that, and you'll see when we're looking at functions, you'll hear this divide and conquer piece, and just meaning that hey, we've got blocks of code that may or may not run. So we're dividing things up into different tasks, and they're going to perform things for us. And so maybe we'll send, the computer will look at a certain function, and it will run every single time that the user executes the program. And sometimes, functions may not run at all. It just depends. And we'll see some live examples of this too. So all sorts of modules that we're going to build, and you'll see these as we go along too. It's kind of fun, and you see this little graphic on the next one. Uh, and with this is sort of what we've been doing, right? So we've been doing the statements, and we've done with like I don't know, decision structures with our if statements. We've sort of broken this up a little bit, but for the most part, we're still starting at the top, line one, and we're running straight through. So when we're separating things out into different functions, you'll see we could have lots of different functions, and maybe one time a user runs it, it runs functions one, two, and three, and the next time it runs all four, and the next time it only runs three. So there are lots of different options here, and I'll give you just a quick example. Let's say that you have, you're trying to figure out net pay for an employee, and you've got different functions built in. So maybe one function, let's say function two, is to calculate, and there are lots of ways to write these. But let's say that one of them is to calculate regular pay. So maybe you're based on hours per day, or maybe hours per week. So let's say 40 hours per week. So if the user inputs that they worked 40 hours per week or less, then function two is our regular function calculator here to figure out net pay. That's great. But maybe function three, and obviously we give it a different name, but maybe this is our overtime function, so that if the user says, hey, I worked 47 hours this week, then we need to figure out what the overtime pay is. So we make a function that will calculate overtime pay. And for that overtime pay, that's great. We write the code in there, and we're going to calculate overtime here, but there's no reason to run this function, the overtime function, if all we're doing is regular pay. If we know that the hours that the employee worked, they didn't work any overtime hours. So this function will not run in that case. So there are lots of options. It gives us all sorts of different choices when we're looking at these, and you'll see that as we go along. So some of the benefits that you'll see. And you may argue this first point with me at the beginning. Simpler code. Writing your code with functions may take a little bit more code, and you'll see that as we get going here. But simpler meaning that you can lay things out, and like I said with the overtime, example just a second ago, you can have certain pieces that will run. It makes it simpler when you get your program set up. That sometimes things will run, sometimes they won't, and it's a great way of doing things, and you'll see that as you start using them. Code reuse. So write it one time and call or execute it multiple times. So that is a very, very useful feature too. So we can, at any point, if we need to calculate something or run a specific, function, we just call it. It's not that big a deal. So you can do it anywhere in the program. Uh, the nice thing with testing and debugging, each one of the functions you can test individually. So if you know that you have a function that's working but you have an error in your program, you're like, man, I can't figure this out. Well, you know that call that specific function and see if each one of your functions is working. You can test it that way. So once you know that a function is working, then you can skip it, go down and test the next one out. So it's kind of nice. You'll see, you'll love that too. So I'm a big advocate, as you're probably figuring out so far with using functions. But as you get into this more, I think you will be too. Faster development. So if you're breaking things up, you have certain people that will work on a specific function. That's what their job is. That's what their task is, and then you get together and put them together, and that has to do with also easier facilitation teamwork. So by breaking things up, so you may be in charge of writing a specific function. You're following the same naming conventions, all that kind of good stuff with your team, and then you're getting back together, putting the code together, and it works great. So again, you'll see that too as we play along with this. All right, so two different types. The last little piece here, two different types that we're going to be playing with. One is known as a void function, and one we'll call value returning or just a returning function. And so we have a void function. What we're doing here is we're saying, hey, we've got, and let me step back over here really quickly. Let's say that we have this particular program, we're running along, and maybe it's sequential so far, and then we're going to call a function. So a void function, you'll see just one more time here, executes the statements it contains, and then it ends, it terminates, and it's done, right? So what that would mean is if I'm over here and I'm going through this program and I send something into a function, it's going to go into that function, it's going to execute, and then that's it, and it's going to be done. A value returning function, what that one will do, we're going to execute the statement it contains, and then it returns a value back to the statement that called it. For example, if I come over here and we were talking about an overtime, so if I come back down here, this is my overtime piece. So maybe I send my overtime hours into an overtime calculation function here, and then it returns the dollar value that needs to be put in back to wherever it was called. So that's the way that works. And you've actually been using value returning function. And so just a quick example of one would be input. So we've been using input, and remember what it does. The user just inputs data on the keyboard, and then we're returning that as a string. Now we've been changing that around and making them an integer or a float or whatever, but this is a value returning function is input, and so that one's already built in for us, so we don't have to do it. But we're going to end up defining, and you see as you go through the next few weeks, we will define our own functions, have our own values that we decide that we want returned, and use them in all sorts of different programs. So you'll see it's kind of fun. I just want to show you one little last piece, and we'll actually refer to this a couple different times. But if you go to pythontutor.com, which we've been using, of course. So pythontutor.com, and if we come in here, and this is just the simple, click on this piece here, and here we are in Python 3.6. So to show you the void and the value returning, by default, our main function for for Python is set up for us. We don't have to do anything with it, but that's not true in other languages. And we're going to actually write our own main functions here in a little bit, so that you can get the idea of how this works. But for the most part, if you take a look and you'll see kind of the defaults they have here. So if I pick something like C++ and I click on that, let's take a look at the terminology. Now, you may have never seen C++ code before, but as we take a look at this, you'll see there are some defaults in here, and these are preloaded defaults because each program has to have this to run. And our programs that we're going to write a little later in the chapter, we will start forcing the main function and define it, and you'll see all that stuff too. But you can see on here, notice this piece, and you should recognize some of this stuff now. So just integer here, and then we have main. So here is this is the name of the particular function that's built in, right? So we have main, and then we've got some other stuff here. So you recognize these things, and then little curly braces to keep stuff in. And then notice where this says return zero. This is a quick and dirty way in C++. This is basically a void function. So we're not returning anything to this main function. Okay, so that's one. Another one that we could look at here real quick. Let's take a look at Java. So we take a look at Java, and none of this stuff really means anything to you yet, but take a look at this. So as we look in here and you see void. Okay, so here's our void function. The same thing. We need this to get started in Java. So right now you're thinking, oh, I'm so glad I chose the Python class to start learning coding. Yes. So eventually this kind of stuff, you'll figure out. And honestly, at this point, if you stepped into another language, you wouldn't have any trouble getting started. We've already done a lot of basics. You would just need to learn the syntax. And in fact, people will step the next class. I see a lot of people will take a C++, and you'll find that C++ really it's just a matter of learning new syntax and what are the new rules of the language. How do I set things up and how do I get started and all that kind of good stuff. And you'll find that now picking up something like C++, it won't be that difficult for you. So I see that with a lot of students, and that's the feedback that I get is, man, we started with Python and now C++ is so easy. And even stepping into Java, again, it's just about learning the rules. And what all this stuff means. So anyway, so there's that. Now I don't want to get too much into other languages, but because we have enough to deal with functions here. But I think you guys will enjoy this chapter. Again, it will take you a little bit of time. So I know we're just starting out here. Make sure you watch the videos. Sorry, I know I get a little bit long-winded with some of these, but I'll try and keep them short, just per section here. But I'll go through some live code as we're doing them. So please make sure to watch the videos because, especially with this topic, you'll want to make sure that you're following along and understanding kind of what's going on as we're rolling through this stuff. So anyway, have fun. I hope you enjoy chapter 5.